Welcome to the Structural Engineering Podcast. This week we're delving into a rather unique topic, one that's often overlooked in traditional engineering education, but undeniably vital in our professional journeys: sales within the engineering practice. Joining us today is Mark Wainwright, a seasoned sales consultant specializing in the construction industry and professional services. While it's been a few years since I've explored this area, Zach brings a wealth of insight, and I'm certain you'll notice the depth of our discussion reflected in the questions we ask. One of the key insights I've gleaned from Mark is the importance of maintaining a sense of curiosity. This trait not only enhances our capabilities as engineers, but it also proves invaluable in sales and various other aspects of our career trajectory. Whether it's discovering innovative bridge building methods or devising a more efficient cost solution for our clients, these aspects are inextricably connected and fundamentally crucial. So tune in as we explore the realms of sales and client relations, indispensable elements as we navigate through our professional endeavors.
Well, thanks for having me, Max. Zach, good to be here. My name is Mark Wainwright. I have a practice called Wainwright Insight. I am a consultant to professional services firms of all types. I've been doing this for about the last 6 or 7 years. I have worked in professional services firms for about 22, 23 years or so. Marketing agencies, architecture firms, landscape architects, engineers, consultants, economists, analysts, financial managers, management consultants, all different types of folks who sell their expertise, not products and widget companies. And I've really enjoyed the practice of coming alongside the individuals in those organizations and introducing them to contemporary sales techniques, sales skills, sales approaches, and even getting them over the hump of that scary word, sales.
Well, we appreciate you wanting to talk with Max and I. Like we're chatting a little bit earlier. It's been a few years of trying to get this to work, and we took a little bit of a break there for a little bit. So, both Max and I have found that as we continue in our career, sales has become more at the front of our minds and the back of our minds. And we found that, a lot of our listeners are kind of in the same place. And as engineers and, with the plethora of different places you've worked, I'm sure too, that it's not at the front of our minds. As engineers, we're excited about engineering. So I think with this episode, super excited to hear more about sales. So to start us off, we just want to start with the basics, something Max and I typically do on most of our episodes, the 101. So what is sales and why is it important to an AE firm?
Right. Well, to point out the obvious, without sales on the front end, people are going to have a tough time doing the engineering work on the back end. So, it's important that all professional services firms do a good job of finding and winning work. But one of the concerns, and I'm certain it's top of mind for people who are listening, is it's what is that scary thing? Sales is it salesy? Right. Obviously, those two words are related, but I think that you can sell your services and find and win new work and new clients without being salesy. And I think being salesy has a lot of negative connotations to it. Sales has changed from 20, 30 years ago. What we always sort of, this picture we have in our mind of, you can fill in the blank, right? It's the sleazy, tricky, deceitful used car salesperson. It's like, you've got this image in your mind, right, of coming into a situation where you're going to make a big purchase and you're going to be taken advantage of by somebody who's a little more savvy and tricky maybe than you want them to be. So we're trying to shake off this decades old hangover about what sales really is. Sales is different, and here's the two fundamental reasons why I think sales has changed over the last decades or so. Number one is information. Years ago, the salespeople used to have all the information about the products and the services that they offered. Now, roles reversed, right? With the power of the internet, with being able to Google anything under the sun, buyers often have as much or more information at their fingertips than salespeople do. The second thing is that choice has exploded, right? Years ago, when you needed to go purchase something, a car, an appliance, whatever, your choice to do so was limited. Now you can, let's just use that obvious car analogy, right? You can buy a car online, right? You can literally go and plug in your information and have the car delivered to your sidewalk out front. You can go to a lot. You can rent cars on, in any different online tool that you want to access at any time of the day. You can buy a car anywhere. But the problem with all of that is now you have too many choices. You have so many choices, it becomes hard to actually pick a particular one, right? And with this overload of information that has, just exploded over the last 2 decades or so, sales has now changed to needing to be a really good guide, right? Because a good salesperson needs to help you navigate the mountain of information that you've read, you've heard, you've listened to online, and to help you kind of navigate the many, many choices that are in front of you. So sales has changed radically because of this huge explosion of information and choice. So sales isn't about being pushy, because if you're a pushy salesperson, somebody's just going to go somewhere else. They're like, I have a lot of options. I don't have to deal with you, pushy salesperson, right? So sales is no longer about being pushy or salesy. It's about being a really, really good guide. So that's first and foremost. And hopefully that concept starts to get people's sort of perception of what selling is sort of shifted.
Yeah, I really like that, because that's when I started my career. That was the first thing I thought about as a sleazy salesperson. Like, we got to go out and sell work. I mean, but guiding someone with information makes a lot more sense, and a good way to kind of put it together.
Yeah.
So within these AE firms that you've worked with, who's typically doing the sales, would you say?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, in a lot of professional services out there, you have just a handful of folks, maybe even one, maybe just two or so. And they're usually longtime partners, senior team members, those folks. And they sometimes exhibit behaviors and characteristics that, maybe they're a little more extroverted, maybe they're more outgoing, maybe they really like the large sort of networking events and other things like that, right? So that is okay. The challenge that most professional services firms out there, engineering firms, architecture firms, consulting firms, whatever they are, the biggest challenge they face is that they just have too few of those people, right? So you run into sort of I hate to use this analogy, but it's like the hit by the bus situation, where it's like, look, if you have just a very small number of people in your firm that you rely on year in and year out to be generating new work, and one of them leaves, one of them retires, that type of a scenario, then you're just in an unsustainable situation. So it is my hope that in general, and also potentially with the firms that I work with, that firms are just recognizing a need to sort of democratize the work of sales across and down into their organizations, so they just have more people involved in general.
So when we first started talking, you shared a concept called the Toyota Way, or levels of mastery. Right. I really like how this is laid out and builds a good understanding of sales principles. Could you tell us a little bit about the Toyota Way of concept?
Yeah, I came across this because I wanted to get a better grasp, or at least understand a framework on how do people learn and how do people master things? What sort of logical steps do they take in the progression from not knowing something, not being able to do something well, to the point where they've mastered it and potentially are teaching others to do it? What are the steps? Are there any steps out there? Is there a process? Is there something that explains this? And I came across this little bit of information that was kind of born from the Toyota Way that moves through 5 steps of mastery, right? The first is to know or having heard the concepts, which is referred to as sort of knowledge. The second is to know and really understand the concepts, and that's understanding. So we've got knowledge and understanding. The third is to be able to do and practice and start doing them well, right? That's the third one, is practicing things. The fourth is to do continuously very well and then improve over time. So that fourth one is improvement. And then the fifth is to be able to do it and then to be able to teach others, right? So that's teaching others. So the 4 are knowledge, understanding, practice, improvement, and teaching others, right? So those are the five. And hopefully people can picture along in their minds this sort of stair step of improvement as you move from knowledge to being able to teach others.
I think it's a great way of thinking and developing. I think today through the podcast, that's kind of what we want to do. We want to start with, what does it look like right when you're starting your career, and you're gaining the understanding of what the heck is sales,
right,
to me. And then as we proceed through our careers up to that mastery, and you're teaching now others that. So I think that's how we'll be formatting today's conversation. And so anyone listening, just know we're kind of starting off with, if you're early in your career, what sales might mean to you and look like for you is, and then as you progress, what that might look like. And when you get to your, towards your end of your career, and you're now teaching that and kind of strategy for those things. So,
right.
I'm excited to jump into this. So Max, start us off with year one.
Yeah, I'm gonna do our first year here, which would be tied to to know of or to have heard the concepts. Right, it's the start of this Toyota way. And when you're working with AE firms, what conversations do you typically have about entry-level engineers and their position in the sales strategy? I think it's common to feel very disconnected when you're starting your job, but I don't know if that's really the place to be.
Right. And I would even interject that most first year or very early year professionals probably aren't even sort of operating at that knowledge level. They're not really being exposed to new ideas and new concepts regarding sales. I think they should, right? So maybe this conversation is ideally what should be happening, and then we've also got sort of what's actually happening out there. So if individuals are early on in their careers, they should be exposed to these concepts. And obviously we're talking about sales here. So what generally that means is that people are being exposed to it and starting to understand. They're hearing new words and new language. They're not excluded from conversations regarding sales. They are included in those conversations. They are made aware of sort of how contracts and proposals are put together. They understand the dollars and cents that are going into these projects. They start to hear the terms about, contract amounts and profitability and annual revenue targets and, sales pipelines and things like that. So they start to hear those terms. They aren't necessarily actively involved in sales pursuits, but they're being introduced to those terms so that mid-career, these terms aren't new to them. These concepts aren't new to them. All too often, people find that they're 5-10 years into their professional careers, they get promoted to a new position, and everybody starts extending their hands and say, "Hey, congratulations! Guess what? It's time to go win some new business." Right? And they're going, "Oh my gosh! Right? Are you what? This wasn't part of this isn't what I signed up for." So what we want to do is we want to get a head start on that. Right? Early on in people's career, that we want them to be exposed to the language, the concepts, the ideas, so that when they do hit that 5-year or 10-year point, this isn't new. This isn't new information, right? That's so that first level knowledge level really is an awareness level and a knowledge level that these terms and practices and activities related to sales aren't new to them.
So building on that, what else do you think managers can do to mentor their young staff so that in that 5 to 10 years, they can get into sales, feel comfortable about it, especially as they move up that ladder?
Right. Great question. I think one of the, maybe we'll use the term kind of fallacies, or maybe it's just a belief. I think one of the beliefs with a lot of professionals and particularly with technically oriented, technically minded professionals is that if they are excellent at their technical parts of their work, right? If they are technical experts in their field, that will guarantee them future success, right? If you're just really, really good at the engineering, you're going to, be part of a successful firm, a successful organization. It's all going to work out great, right? Unfortunately, the bad news about that is that there's a lot of other things that go into a successful practice and a successful career. And one of those things is sales, right? There are other parts of it. There's marketing activities, there's financial management, there's firm management, there's human resources. There's all different parts of, if you're picturing along with me, you're starting to see the pie slices in that pie chart, that there's a lot of components to a successful practice. Finding and winning work, selling is one of them. And there's all these other areas as well. So individuals do need to understand that, yes, we need to be more than just proficient at our craft. We need to start gaining some level of mastery with all of these other things that you were introduced to way back in school during that 1 or 2 days that you took the quote, right, the professional practice part of your degree, right?
Yeah. And that really hit for me there, because this is something massive I've learned in my own personal career. Started my first couple of years out at a firm, super focused on engineering, didn't know anything about sales or even thought about it. Started a new firm, and the conversation was happening. They were, teaching me, how approaches and thoughts and strategies, and not necessarily thinking I would go out and do it, but to start bringing me into the knowledge base of how this works.
Right.
And my initial thing was, this is horrible. Well, why are they teaching me more about engineering? Why are they teaching me about sales? I'm an engineer. And I thought for sure that if I could become the best engineer, as you said, I would be promotable and bigger positions. And that's, a business has to run off of revenue, which is where sales comes in. And
right.
It took a couple of years. A mentor of mine told me, Zach, what? That's not how this works. Is become the best engineer, and then every architect comes after you saying, I have to work with Zach because he's the best there is. It's
right.
There's so much
that's
more,
that's possible. It is possible for select individuals inside of organizations to be at the very pinnacle of their craft, right? Yeah. They are the smartest person in the room. They're it. You just can't have too many of them, right? Yeah. You have to recognize that certain individuals they're going to be focused on the craft, on the practice. That's fine. But you have to have others that are willing to carry the load in these other really important functional areas of your firm. So it's not, I don't want to be the guy coming on the structural engineering podcast that says, look, there's still a chance for you slackers, or that, if you're a really good engineer, there's no hope for you, there's just, but firms just concede that, yeah, we're just going to let everyone just be really, really good engineers, and we're not going to expose them and to these other parts of our important business practice. So, yeah, it's important.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So for the first year engineer, what do you see as the ideal relationship between the young engineer and the firm's clients? Right? If our clients are often architects or developers, should they kind of be talking with those people right off the bat, or a different level, I guess?
Yeah, I'm going to go slightly bigger picture on that. And to answer your question specifically, I'm not certain, and I think a lot of it depends on the size of the organization. If you have very large firms, you're going to tend not to have a lot of the very, very early career folks involved in direct client interaction. Smaller firms, that may be happening, but I think one of the superpowers, I would say, that young career professionals have is curiosity. Right? I think they're just starting off in their career, that they're still really wanting to learn, and they're curious about why things are, and the what ifs and the hows, all those types of things. So I think the power that a young professional can bring to any situation, and maybe even into a client conversation, is a sense of curiosity, right? They don't bring a lot of assumption. They don't bring a lot of, oh yeah, we did this 10 years ago. I did this forever ago. I know exactly how this is going to play out. So they bring a really, really healthy sense of curiosity to the conversation. And that's important, because I think the longtime career professionals have lost a little bit of that, right? There's this sense that the long tenured professionals need to be the smartest people in the room and to have all the answers, right? So, and they don't necessarily have maybe the opportunity or the humility to say, I don't know, right? But I think young career professionals really have the opportunity to say, I don't know. Show me, teach me. I want to know more. I want to know why. So I hope that works as an answer.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So building on that too, what do you think about developing your network? How's a professional kind of growing that network and at an early stage in their career that might benefit them as they move?
One of the things that happens in professional services firms is you'll have senior, longtime team members that have these long tenured relationships with clients, with partners who are all about their same, career level, right? So those senior team members are moving along in their careers, and maybe some are retiring, et cetera. They're kind of right. It's sort of a cohort, right? They all kind of came into their careers around a similar time. One of the things that happens in people's heads is that, so we have an important client, and our longtime senior leader, Sue, has had this relationship with Bill at our client for decades. So they think, we want to keep that relationship with that client going. So Sue, our longtime senior leader, is going to bring a junior person along to the meeting with her to introduce her to Bill, right? Now, the problem with that is that there's two things going on, right? First of all, it's akin to, me thinking that, I have a best friend and I'm going to introduce you to my best friend, and all of a sudden the two of you are going to be fast friends, right? That doesn't it doesn't happen, right? The other thing is that if we introduce our young team member to that client, and then that client is retiring, like we've lost that connection. That didn't work. So what I recommend is that if you have an important client or partner or whoever it is, that your young professionals are finding and developing relationships with their cohort at those organizations, right? So your 20 somethings are developing relationships with their 20 somethings, so that so that they grow throughout their careers together. They can look back on the last 10, 20 years or so and says, this is fantastic. We've really created this great working relationship together. So I think what needs to happen is that, the younger career, even mid-career professionals aren't necessarily trying to connect themselves with the decision makers at the client or the partners. They're finding their people, right? They're finding their cohort to connect with. So, and those don't always happen in those sort of big room full of, people in those networking sessions. I think those need to happen a little more informally, maybe. So, so I would say that I ask a lot of folks, I say, look, you're working with this other firm as a partner firm. Maybe they're a prime, contractor, and you're a sub-consultant. Are you actively, communicating with the folks who are your peers over there, or is all the communication just kind of flowing through their project manager or their senior leader, or whatever else? And people say, well, yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. So I think the opportunity there is for folks to create these nice connections at their sort of cohort level, and then watch those sort of grow over time.
How important is it, and this is a goofy maybe way to phrase the question, but how important is it that you actually like the person you're trying to work with, or that they like you?
Well, that is a very good question, because I would say that some people probably put too much weight on that. Now, I think people generally have to be compatible in that their communication is functional, that they have a mutual level of sort of regard and respect for one another. But I think we probably put too much weight on sort of that, and I'll call it affinity, right? Some people are really driven by affinity. Some people are operating in sort of a high affinity mode where they really need people to like them. And I think the reality is, particularly when it comes to sort of technical professions, is you need to be able to turn to your, close working partners, sub-consultants, others, and have them get the job done, right? They need to be really, really competent. They hopefully need to be decent people to work with, and they're fair and considerate and communicative and all that, but they need to get the work done. So it's a good question. I don't want to say that, you shouldn't develop, sort of close kind of friendship relationships with folks, because that happens sometimes, but I don't think that's necessarily a guarantee of, it's all going to be rosy, right? You have to balance the character thing, I think, which is, that personal relationship thing, with the competency thing, which is you do what you say you're going to do, you get the job done, et cetera. So there's a balance there.
So with that, I always think, or I've heard before, it's like everyone sells the same widget. You want to sell them you, I guess. But how do I phrase this? If there's 10 engineering firms, how would you say you differentiate yourself to have that client want to work with you versus everyone else? If you don't necessarily have that super close relationship.
Right. We could talk on another entire podcast just strictly on sort of differentiator. Like how can one firm separate itself from all of the others? I think there's a number of ways that you can separate yourself. One is a very specific focused expertise. One is, very, very close, mutually respectful, mutually dependent kind of relationships. One is, a long tenure working with those folks. There's a bunch of different ways that you can separate yourself away from the pack. I believe that it is harder than most firms believe to actually separate yourself from everyone else, because in a lot of cases, firms are trading employees like, baseball cards. So from that sense, sort of expertise and skill are fairly fluid. So, you'll have two skilled team members go to a competitor and they'll trade two back at some point. So it's difficult to lean too heavily on your expertise, but there's a lot of different ways you can differentiate. One of the, just to close that thought out, one of the things that I find most important and a great opportunity to differentiate yourself is the level to which you can be curious and understand your partners, your clients' needs. Don't make too many assumptions, and then really be responsive to that sort of understanding, right? I talk a lot about the importance of understanding. That I think is part of it. I think if your firm can present itself as we get our clients better than anybody else gets their clients, I think that's a big differentiator. So
I just recently read a book that you just completely hit on. Have you ever read the book Getting Naked?
No, I've heard of it, Doc.
Okay. Very good. It talks about that a lot, like how important it is and to, go to your client and just listen to them and not come with a presumption of knowing how to solve their issues, but actually listen to their problems live and work through those things. So man, I really like that.
I like it. Good. And I think that like you captured it. I think that notion is an opportunity for differentiation.
So, I mean, this is almost a flip, but it's something that we've touched on a little bit, and it's really, for someone, a younger engineer here that doesn't really feel like they have an interest in sales, I would assume you really can't be disconnected. But if your goal is to just be the best engineer you could be, how can you? What can be done on a regular basis to help the firm with new clients besides just doing the best job as an engineering role that you can?
Yeah, I think that relates to that sort of innate curiosity of young career professionals that I mentioned before. You can always be willing to explore different ideas. You can, as a young professional, can show up in those conversations and say, look, we're making way too many assumptions here. This situation isn't necessarily the same as the other situation. So we need to keep asking questions and be curious about this so that we can come up with the best recommendations and the best solutions. So I do think a young career professional can lead that effort to, not make too many assumptions, not just slap on the same old approach or the same ideas that you've been doing for a long time, to really bring some new, fresh thinking to it. So I think they can be the lead with that idea.
So, since we're sort of near the end in our first year time frame of questions here, I want to ask for people that really like to flip open a book or, whatever the resource is, maybe another podcast. What do you see as a good sales book, reference book to start out when you're starting?
Yeah, there's well, just the visual concept of seeing an engineer with a sales book in their hand is, would be wonderful. Right? I mean, and I don't want to run down a long list of titles, but just the fact that someone would be willing to extend themselves to actually pick up a book that had sales on the front cover would be a win, right? And just about any book out there would be good. Now, the challenge with a lot of the content and books and blog posts and a big challenge right now with a lot of people who are in professional services is that a lot of the sales stuff out there needs a bit of translation. Most of the sales books and sales content, I believe, is written for a specific individual who is typically a full-time salesperson operating within a sales team selling a software as a service product, right? A SaaS product, right? So most of the sort of buzz, and those almost white noise that you hear out there related to sales is targeted towards those individuals, people who are, selling to large and very large size organizations, and they're selling them seats of AutoCAD or Salesforce or some accounting software or whatever else. So there is a little translation that has to happen, because in professional services, generally speaking, the selling is done by the practitioner, right? You don't have full-time salespeople, and they are selling a high dollar, low volume, right? Not a lot of them, very complex service, right? They're not selling widgets, they're not selling seats, So it's a different thing. There's a few books out there. Daniel Pink has one that is To Sell is Human, which I think is a nice book that bridges sort of professional life to sales, starts to introduce the word sales. There's a book that I just picked up that I haven't dug too deeply into. It's called A More Beautiful Question, and it connects to this concept that I mentioned earlier about curiosity and about the power of questioning. And I've just scratched the surface of that. But I think books like that can reawaken that youthful sense of curiosity that people have. Because I think, highly technical professions sort of grind down the curiosity that individuals can have, right? They just say, someone in an engineering firm will say, look, you just have to be the smartest person in the room, right? You need to be that. And you don't ask why, don't, explore different, don't do that. But I think that the books that make people realize that, actually being curious and developing really good questions is a superpower. I think those types of books will really arm young career professionals well and help them prioritize this whole inquiry thing that sales is really based in.
Yeah, both really good books. How do you differentiate sales and negotiations? Are both skills to learn? Are they synonymous with each other? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, good question. The way I see a lot of professional services firms use the term marketing and business development, and they don't use the term sales as much. I see those three things on a continuum. I see at one end of it, there are marketing activities, and marketing activities are generally designed to establish your brand, which is your point of view and how you sort of present yourself to the marketplace and your position. The other end of that spectrum is sales, and specifically that word you use, negotiation. I think negotiation is that little last bit of sales that's happening to get everyone to yes. And quite possibly business development is somewhere in the middle there, where the business development is maybe slightly more focused activities, more focused than marketing, but you're not necessarily selling a particular service, or you have, a particular contract or a project in mind. Some people throw a big umbrella called business development over marketing and selling. But either way, those are three different things. And to answer your question, Zach, negotiation is absolutely within the world of sales. People who sell need to be prepared to negotiate. And negotiation usually, to most professionals, means, okay, great, it's too expensive. We'll drop our price by 20% and still give you 100% of the work. Right. Right. That's negotiation. But there are so many other ways to negotiate. There's a fantastic book out there by Chris Voss named Never Split the Difference. And there's some wonderful sort of high level ideas, but also some really good concepts, some really good techniques inside that book that sort of highlight the importance of really, really good negotiation. So negotiation is absolutely part of sales. It is in the sales word. And frankly, the proposals that you hand to your marketing people, that your marketing people work on, proposals are in sales, right? So a proposal is a sales tool, right? So proposals are there, negotiation is there. All those things fall under the world of sales.
Yeah, I'm just super into all this. I've been learning a lot about sales negotiations. And one thing I've changed recently, which is to a salesperson probably going to sound really funny, is just ask the client what their expectations are, both from a scope perspective, really dial on the scope and then say, for this scope, what are you expecting from a fee perspective? And half the time they've been answering like, could you just do it for this amount of money? And majority of the time it's like, that's more than I was going to tell you. It's it's crazy. Just a little more communication.
One of the things Chris Voss mentions in his book is to get the other folks to say the number first, right? And that sounds a little tricky and a little salesy, but it's important. I think it's a good piece of information that you can kind of work with there. So yeah, there's a lot to all those bits and pieces, including what you just said, how to negotiate. So yes, it's much more complex than most individuals really want it to be. Most folks just want to race through this whole selling thing and get to the quote real work, right? Let's get the contract and let's start working. But all of these conversations, everything that happens up front in this whole sales process, tees all that other work up for success, right? It really sets everybody up well for those months and sometimes even years that you're going to be working together.
Yeah. Okay, so closing off with this kind of first step of learning sales, what else have we not asked that you think would be important for, let's say, a 1 to 4 year engineer to understand about sales?
I think it's important to find longtime team members who are willing to teach, to guide, to invite you into those conversations, to share what their experiences are, to be able to relay on to the younger team members the nuances and the steps and the conversations and everything they needed to go through from a maybe to a contract, right? And it could have taken months to get there, but finding a senior team member who's really willing to share that information and kind of bring those young team members along is important, because those stories need to be told. And I think they're really interesting. And people who are working on a project, I think ultimately really want to know how it all started. What was the first conversation? What did you say next? What happened next? What was happening when we were negotiating? So finding a senior team member who's willing to bring them along and have them participate and engage in all of this, super important.
Perfect. Let's take a step to the next sequence in a career. And, we are tying the Toyota way to a lot of these. It was when Zach and I were flipping through, and we were thinking year A is kind of to know and really understand the concepts, right? So maybe you're stepping into sales, and on that 8 year, what year do you typically see engineers move from more of a technical side, learning the basics of engineering, to more of a sales drive?
Right. I would say not early enough. Right. That's my response to that, is that not early enough. And just to kind of leap off of what you were just saying right there, I would say by the time we're considering people in sort of year 8, year 10, maybe these mid-career folks, they've been around long enough, is that they should be accelerating to the point where they're starting to practice these things, right? So understanding and practice are important, and they are linked, right? Understanding is that second level of mastery, and practicing is the third. I think what happens is we're really not able to understand concepts until we put them to the test, right? Until we start actually applying them, then we think, oh, that's how it works, right? And that's when understanding happens, that when you're able to start connecting these concepts and ideas to actually doing things, right? So the understanding and practice, I think, happens almost together. But yes, by this point in their careers, they should be practicing and understanding things at the same point. But yeah, they should be absolutely practicing some of this stuff.
It seems like the thing a firm could do, the best thing they could do is find what their every employee gets excited about and is motivated by, and leveraging that, providing the resources for that. Do you see, when you're going into these firms, that's like common practice, or do you think it's kind of status quo a little bit more? Are firms really thinking about how to leverage their employees' excitement about what they want to do?
Yeah, it's a great comment. I would say that's more of an ideal than a reality. The reason I say it's an ideal is because I think people will be more engaged, more invested, more focused on work and projects that they're connected to in some way, that they really like and enjoy, that maybe even they were part of sort of originating and creating it. But a lot of times in practice, there's a couple of things going on. There's maybe some project that some senior team member is really interested in, and very few people are. But lo and behold, you say yes, and everybody's kind of working on it. Or you just get what you can get, right? Some firms are just like, we don't know where our next dollar is coming from, so we need to say yes, right? Even though it's not aligned with where we are right now as a firm, or frankly where we want to go. We just need to say yes in order to keep the butts in the seats and keep the revenue going. So I would say the minority of new projects, new opportunities that come into firms are ones that were driven by somebody's really focused attention, their drive. They're like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to chase it down until I get it.
To one of those points that you stated in there of like needing to maybe do some work that you don't want to keep the revenue going, right? Keep the people in the seats and stuff. When you're consulting, what are you saying to those firms that are saying, hey, we got probably 50% of our revenue with clients we don't enjoy working, our staff doesn't enjoy working with, but we need revenue? How do you transition yourself out of that? Where does your focus go to?
Right. It's usually connected to a reactive mindset versus a proactive mindset. Firms that are generally much more reactive are just, like I said, taking what they can get, saying yes. Most firms can sort of create a picture of some future state where they're doing a certain type of work. The firm is a certain size. People are happy. They're engaged. In these types of projects that are doing the public good, or or high design, or whatever. There, most people can create a picture of what some future state looks like, but when you compare that to where they are now, they're usually very, very different. So, I think the best way, and frankly one of the only ways to have firms reconsider what they're saying yes to, is creating that future picture. Okay, you're doing these types of projects. You're this type of a firm. You're working in these geographic locations. To have them constantly be focused on that future picture, and using that to be one of their major decision, points, is that, look, if you say yes to this project, is this going to take you closer to that picture or further away from it? Right. So, and a lot of times it's that simple. It's like, is this sewer infrastructure project going to take you closer to doing the civil engineering for that grand visionary project that it might not be, right? So I think that's a reality check.
Yeah. So growth can maybe be thought of more than just a revenue standpoint and a more employee standpoint. It could be also thought about as having better projects and clients, or is growth mostly just thought of as from a revenue standpoint?
No, I think there's sort of hard and soft definitions of growth. Sure, there's a revenue component to it, but there's also firm size. Are we deepening our expertise in certain areas where clients are starting to come to us to say, look, you're the recognized expert in this area. There's no other obvious choice other than your organization because you've developed such a focused expertise here. I think that's a form of growth. I think having young team members and mid-career team members, having them want to stay, want to move to firm ownership, firm leadership, all those are really positive signs of growth. I think that the growth term can be a little tricky, and just that people can assume that it's just focused on revenue, but not necessarily. I think a firm can grow a number of different ways that might bring along that revenue growth, but necessarily aren't focused on the revenue growth.
So I have a question that sort of relates to the size of firm that you work for and the goals that you're setting for yourself. Mm-hmm. So in my example here, if I worked for a very large firm, right, that did mostly tall buildings, it'd feel like an overreach to set a goal to bring in a new project of a 20-story tower, Yeah. And a smaller engineering firms, it could be very reasonable to say, like, you brought in a house, a porch, something in that level. Do you try to take the smallest similar project that you're very comfortable with when you're starting to look into the sales abilities? Or, I guess how would you frame that?
Yeah, great. I think it's a great question. I think that regardless of the size of the potential project, it's good for someone to be able to move through the steps and kind of move through the motions, right? So, and I think eventually the size of the project is less important, and it's just someone's experience and being able to move through all of the conversations and the steps it takes to go from a maybe to a contract. Because I think they're going to have some similar conversations and similar steps. So, just getting practice on the 1, 2, 3. How do you take it from this point to getting the contract signed? That's more important, I would say, than the overall size of the project. So I guess to that point, it's less about the project, the size of it, the scope, and it's more about, can you successfully navigate all those conversations from point A to point Z, whatever it is. So I think that's important. I don't think the size matters. I think the size of the project will come naturally as people progress in their careers. And I think one of the realities is that it doesn't matter necessarily the size of the project, because a lot of the buyers and the clients are thinking and behaving and acting the same way, regardless of the dollars and cents. The same things are the same sort of, cognitive biases and irrational thinking and all those things that come into people's heads when they're in these complex buying, selling situations. A lot of those same things are happening, whether it's $1 million contract or a $10 million contract. So I think that the size is less critical. People should be less focused on that.
Yeah. How should a person approach a new project category for a firm? So I want to use mass timber as an example, because this is a new or returning practice. Most of us are interested in designing in that realm, but we don't likely have a lot of experience there. Basically, how do we approach this new structural design approach when we can't advertise our past experience being very good or any experience at all, really?
Right. I think this speaks to, we touched a little bit on that whole kind of character and competency sort of balance, right? When we were talking about our relationships with our clients. In this type of a situation, if you're entering a new area, a new expertise, a new building type, whatever it is, like mass timber, your competence, right? Your actual internal abilities, your skills, everything else are going to be lower. So you probably need to lean on existing clients with whom you have longer term trusted relationships with, and go in that direction together, right? Maybe they're interested in it and they say, look, we know you guys don't have a really long history with this type of work, but we've developed a great relationship with you and we know that you're smart folks, and we're willing to kind of go there with you. I don't think it's possible to go to a whole new expertise, a whole new building type, whatever it is, with someone that's new. I just think that's super hard, and you're trying to push a rock up a hill. I think the best way to approach it, not the easiest way, because none of this is easy, but I think the best way to approach it is with an existing client who has some level of trust and regard for your organization, that they say, look, we understand that, this is kind of new for both of us. Let's go explore together. Right.
Yeah. So I feel like my next question is really kind of taking a turn, because it's not the existing client. How much effort would you say does it take to develop a new client, or should you put into kind of reaching out to a new client?
Yeah. When I work with organizations and they start talking about, we need to go find new clients, what I think is most important is to create a specific offer, likely something that is focused and some very tight expertise that you have a lot of experience with, you have a great track record with, you have a lot of referable or referenceable clients in your past that you've done this particular thing for, and offer them that. So how that looks is, you're going to approach a new potential client organization. You're going to say, look, we do this one thing really, really well for clients just like you. Would you entertain doing this one thing with us? Because we've got a lot of experience. We have a ton of clients we've done this really successfully with in the past. We do this one thing, and it could be, small, low dollar, small scope, whatever it is, but it hopefully is a really compelling offer for that client to kind of give you a test ride. To kind of test out how you guys are. And what better way to test something than to do something that you have a really, really deep expertise in? So rather than walking in the front door of a new client and says, hey, we will do A to Z, top to bottom, side to side for you, and having them say, great, get in line. There's 10 other firms that, are willing to do that. I say, go to them, tell them you want to do this one specific thing. And then they say, oh, no, what about these 6 other things? You're like, you know what? Let's do this one thing, right? Let's be really focused. Say no to all the other steps. Say yes to the one thing. Hit a home run, do an amazing job. And then like, oh, great. What else can you do? Oh, thanks for bringing that up. We can do a lot, right?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So thinking, mid-career here, you've now developed, as we talked, like you should have developed some working relationships with your peer group. And now you're kind of in the point in your career where you're looking to convert those relationships into a sale. I don't even know if that's the right way to phrase it, but how do you, someone's sitting there going, man, I got a lot of friends that are architects. I'd love to do work with them. What do you think that process, it's almost maybe, what does that sales process look like?
Well, it's, this falls into that category of, you have to start making use of these great networks that you've hopefully developed by your mid-career. I think there's a lot of people out there, to use an old term, right? The old Rolodex term, I think there's a lot of people out there who are mid-career professionals who have these great Rolodexes, right? Or, to a slightly more modern, version of, their Outlook contacts list is huge, right? But it's not producing anything, right? So I think the most successful mid-career professionals that can turn that corner are the ones that can start making really good use of those connections, and there's a few ways you can do it. You can start asking your good connections for introductions to potential clients, referrals, and you do that in a proactive fashion, right? If you have, longtime team members that you've worked with at other firms, start sitting down with them and say, hey, when we worked together last year, we completed this one project and I think things went pretty well. What do you think, right? What could have happened differently in order for this particular thing to go a little bit better, right? There was that one thing where we stubbed our toe a little bit and, we had that little hiccup in the project. How do you think we could avoid that in the future? And if that sounds like a little bit of a hard conversation that, your average engineering, team member might have, it is. Right? Because you're being a little vulnerable there. But that's a fantastic way to deepen those relationships and have them say, oh yeah, that one little thing did kind of go sideways a little bit, but it's great that, they've come back to us and said, look, we saw it. We know it happened, right? There was that little hiccup. We want to make sure it never happens again. And then they'll think, oh, this is great. They're willing to kind of fix that little bump in the road. And the next time the next project comes around, they're going to be like, yes, those guys, they're good at what they do, but they're also kind of proactive problem solvers. So,
yeah, it's funny. The last 4 or 5 years, Max and I've been doing the podcast. The thing that pretty much has come up on every single podcast, and you pretty much just said it there, is communications. That is what solves every single problem we're dealing with. You mentioned, you've run into a little issue. Be a little vulnerable, have a conversation. Yeah. It's wild how much just communicating with other humans can really push you forward, I guess.
Right. One of the things I come back to often is that most projects run into speed bumps, have problems, whatever else, as a result of sort of the people factor, the communications, the interactions, that interpersonal, relationship or lack thereof during projects. It's rarely sort of the technical stuff. It's, you rarely have your engineers coming to you saying, I just can't figure it out, right? They're just, I can't, that doesn't happen. You work with, you guys are smart. You work with really smart people. You've got it figured out, right? The thing that people lose sleep over all the time is just that communications thing. It just, I sent them that note, they didn't get back to me, or they misinterpreted what I said, or, that sort of thing.
I think you're probably picking up on the fact that Zach knows a lot about sales, is in that world, and I'm more the step back engineer. So I'll continue to ask my engineering related questions. Sure. So tell me a little bit about a sales conversation with a prospective client. Like, what does that look like? And, again, what I just said, I'm coming from the perspective of somebody else is generally the person doing that. So how would you describe what that often looks like?
Yeah, there's a bunch of conversations when I refer to that, when I use the term the sales process. And when you think of a process, you think that it has steps, right? And it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? That kind of thing. So people can understand what a process is. And sales is a process. And typically it takes longer than people either expect or want it to. A lot of times, kind of coming across a maybe to working to a contract takes months, right? It can take a long time. Sometimes it can take even longer than that. So there's a series of conversations that have to happen throughout that whole process. But one conversation that happens likely early on is something I refer to as a discovery conversation. And a discovery conversation is really where you need to bring that curiosity and that inquiry, right? And it can't be, an FBI interrogation, but it needs to be largely based on inquiry, right? You need to be asking lots of questions. And I said this before briefly, that sales is founded in inquiry. So what that means, in your typical sales conversation, you're not going to walk in the front door to your prospective client and start showing them your slide deck, right? Don't ever do it, right? You're going to walk and you're like, all right, and this happens all the time in your firm, in many other firms. All right, we're going to have a meeting with this prospective client. What are we going to show them? And you put together the deck with the pretty pictures, and you have a 60-minute meeting. The next day you reflect on it and you think, wow, we had a 60-minute meeting and we talked for 50 and they didn't say anything, right? I mean, how much of a disaster is that, right? So you have to flip that completely over and say, coming into this conversation, we are going to come up with great questions so that if we have a 60-minute meeting, they talk for 50, right? So ideally, you come out of that conversation understanding who they are, what they like, what they don't like, what their important goals are, what their priorities are, what they're trying to achieve. When they work with people like you, what do they like to have happen? What's important to them? Communication, organization. You've come out of that conversation with a really deep understanding of them rather than just yakking about all the projects you've done.
Yeah, active listening, pretty important thing to do there.
Yeah.
So I commonly think of relationship as a bank account with deposits and withdrawals. And I think I find often that as trying to sell and work with clients, that we seem to be always kind of withdrawing from them, asking them questions, asking them for work, maybe not the questions, but asking them for work. What kind of things in that process can we do that we're depositing into the bank account? So we're making sure that the relationship is staying mutual beyond just doing really good work.
Right. I love that. I love that analogy because I think of it a similar way. I think there's some sort of an equity that's happening, right? If you're asking them for introductions or their time that you're you're extracting, you're taking withdrawals from that account. So I think that's a great analogy. I think that there's a couple things going on. I think rather than just continue to say, hey, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? Because a lot of times people can't come up with things that you can do for them. So it's hard. People sometimes have a hard time reciprocating. They don't really know how. I'll tell you, the other thing that comes to mind for me that's almost as important is giving people the opportunity to help you and then kind of closing the loop and being really, really grateful for that. i.e., here's an example, right? If you have a close professional connection of yours that you go and you ask, hey, I have a sense that you know some people at this firm. You may know them personally. Maybe you've done some work with them in the past. We would really like to get to know them. The person is great. No problem. I will make an introduction. I think the way that you can reciprocate that is you can do some introductions on your own. You can introduce them to other folks. That's fine. But I think another that's just as important is you go back to your contact and say, I know that you invested a little bit of sort of your equity, that I withdrew a little bit from that. I want to tell you, I want to thank you for it. I'm very grateful for it. That conversation went extremely well and it has progressed, to, we're going to talk about this project together. It is great. So thank you, and I think that we underestimate the opportunity to ask people to help us and then go back to them with some really, really good gratitude.
That's interesting. What would you say from let's say, you're working with an architect firm, you have a dozen clients, and this one you really enjoy working with, they only do a couple projects a year. So the relationship you have with the person that you sell work with or to at that firm, you're not interacting too much year to year. Do you need to be worried that you're not touching base with them enough? Should you be actively touching base with them, even though there's no necessarily sales that's going to occur actively in the sense of a new project?
Yeah, I do think so, and I think that people would, if you had to put a sort of a title to it, people would say that is pure sort of business development work, where you're maintaining those connections. It can be challenging to just flat out come up with whatever you're going to say to somebody you haven't interacted with over the last 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or whatever. It can be challenging, but I think a little bit of planning and a little bit of work can help. Just a little bit of forethought, not sending off that, hey, just checking in email, but rather putting a little thought and a little planning to it that says, look, I came across this particular thing the other day. I immediately thought of you. I thought I would share it with you. Hopefully it resonates with you and you found it to be of value. I think that's important. And I think that most folks just don't bring enough rigor and organization to maintaining those relationships, because people think, oh, I don't want to put my 20 top professional contacts on a spreadsheet and be working with them like it's this task, this putting checkboxes and numbers and all this other stuff against it. But you kind of have to do that, right? You don't have to act like it's this mechanical process, but you need to keep yourself organized. So most folks, we just start off with, look, you get a spreadsheet, put 5 people down there, figure out when the last time that you interacted with them was, figure out some reasonable cadence that you should be interacting with them. Is it every 3 months, 6 months, every year, whatever it is? And then figure out what that next date is, right? If it was 6 months ago and you said, I'm going to touch base with these folks every half year, come up, do a little bit of thoughtful research into something that is relevant and important and valuable to them, and then fire it off. So I think bringing a little bit of organization and, hopefully that whole sort of organization spreadsheet thing just gets the engineers really excited. They're like, wow, good. I can, yes, you can actually organize it, and you don't need to make it seem mechanical, but organization really, really helps. Because I'll tell you, if we think it's been 6 months since we last interacted with that close professional contact of ours, it's been 12, it's maybe been 18. So time just has this funny way of creeping up on us. So yeah, I would bring a little order and sort of rigor to that whole process of just staying in touch with folks.
Yeah, maybe too much rigor, but do you think it's appropriate to ask your client even that? Like, hey, you want to touch base on a quarterly basis? Do you think that's an acceptable question?
Absolutely. It's, and the beauty of that, there's a huge thing about gaining permission. And it's wonderful to have that humility and just create the opportunity where they're able to say, yeah, absolutely, I would love that. And, if they're like, yeah, maybe not, then you're like, okay, cool, great. We'll take you off the list. Because really you want to be interacting with people who want to interact with you, right? So yeah, I think asking permission is an important component at all steps. When I referred to that sales process before, you should constantly be seeking and gaining permission as you move through that whole process. And it's not just the networking thing, staying in touch with folks. It's, hey, we just had this conversation, the other day where I asked you a lot of questions and we got some really great information, et cetera. Would it be okay if we scheduled another conversation in 2 weeks? I think it would be good if you brought in your colleague and I could bring in one of my colleagues and we can dig into this one specific area, and then maybe we'll be able to propose something to you, right? So constantly seeking and gaining permission is a fantastic way to kind of keep things moving.
Sounds like it could help build trust too.
Yeah.
So if we're closing off our sort of mid-career point here, is there anything that we lost, like conceptually, that is really important to understand in your mid-career sales level?
Yeah, we mentioned that word practice, right? And I think that we lose track of actually what that is, right? And practicing is actually doing things and not doing them well and screwing them up, and then reflecting and doing them better next time. Right. So, I mean, we call our, I work in an engineering practice or, an architectural practice, right? We actually call the firm a practice, but people don't actually acknowledge that actually practicing and screwing things up is okay. Right. So a practice is practice, right? It's doing something and not doing it well and reflecting, understanding how you might improve and then doing it better next time. Right. So that mid-career professional shouldn't expect that they're not going to do everything great the first time. I know that's really hard for some people to hear, but that's very true. And, the senior team who's trying to bring those folks along needs to give them a little bit of leeway, right? They need to put them in situations where they need to kind of push and stretch themselves and maybe stub their toe a little bit. But practice is what's required to get better and better over time, which is that next jump in our walk towards mastery, right? That next stair step is improving, and you're never going to improve unless you practice.
That's really a good way to summarize that. So moving into our kind of the end of our career, 20-year engineer plus, now we're trying to teach others. I wanted to start off with a question that might be a little out of order, but what does a successful sales strategy look like? I've heard sales strategy all the time from like a firm perspective. Is it a written thing? Do you develop this from a consultant's help? What does a strategy look like for these companies?
It's a tricky word. And I think it's misused a lot. From everything that I have read, everything that I have seen, the two most important components of a strategy, and this might seem a little 30,000 foot level, but the two most important parts to a strategy are that they are completely externally focused. They're all about the client, and that they have maybe some novelty to them. Maybe they have something that's a little bit of a new idea or a new thought or a reframe or just a new perspective on the marketplace. Like, firms will develop a annual firm strategy, and 75% of it is about how we're going to improve operations and improve our project management, all that other stuff. And there's not enough connection to the outside world. I think a strategy is, internally you can do all the planning you want. Planning and strategy are two different things, right? And the fact that, the word or the words, strategic planning exist is, a little bit of an oxymoron. But I think that a really good strategy is if you can read it, top to bottom, front to back, and it's all completely focused on the external marketplace, on your external clients, and everything that you are doing is in there to benefit your clients, then I think that's a solid strategy. And I think if it's just the same old, it's not very strategic. I think a strategy needs to bring some new thinking, because new thinking inevitably is going to be something that takes you out of your comfort zone a little bit, makes you kind of walk in a direction that you maybe haven't before, but also starts to pull you away from your competition. So those are two really important things, I think, that make a strategic document or a strategy really successful. And, take any of your, take that 3-ring binder off of the shelf at your firm, blow the dust off of it, and really look through it and say, is this novel? Are these new ideas? And is all of this stuff completely written down here in service of our clients? Is this going to make, our clients' lives better?
Yeah. So since companies are here to make profits for the most part, and that's how, a company runs off of revenues and needs profits, where do you think the cost of, the overhead of doing business development and sales fit into that? Is it a common percentage of, here's our total revenue, we'll spend 3 to 5 to 10% of that doing business development, the front end of sales? Or, you said there's usually not enough people, so maybe they don't spend enough on business development. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's, I have kind of a wide-ranging perspective on that. I think one of the constraints that most professional services firms have that I work with are that they, their practice is completely built on the billable hour, right? So what that means is that every single time that they do work or contract work or bill for their work or propose new work, it's all built on these bricks, and the brick is, a billable hour, right? The challenge is that what that means is that you're constantly fixed because your billable hour, like your hourly rate, is fixed on a specific profit margin, right? Because we have a cost, and there's three parts to your billable hour, right? There's your labor cost, there's the organization's overhead, and then there's some profit, right? If you constantly apply that same approach, that same methodology, you're going to have a really tough time increasing profit and growing without adding cost. Like the only way, there's two fundamental problems with the way firms are built, right? The only way to add more revenue is to add more cost, right? Because we add one more person, we have to pay them their salary, and then we get, another 2,080 hours out of them every single year, right? There's no way to scale. And scaling means is that you make more money off of the same number of the same cost, right? Technology firms have this completely figured out. Those things scale like crazy. They don't have to add more cost as they add more revenue and more profit. So there's a little bit of a problem with the business model. In order for firms to scale and maybe add more profit, you have to find opportunities to break out of that. And what that means is that you have to find specific opportunities, potential projects that leave the billable hour behind. That says, okay, we can do that $20,000 of work with you, and we've done a lot. It's a really great. You'll be really happy with the results, but it's your margin on it is twice or three times what it normally would be, because you found a way to do this $20,000 thing again and again, and you've gotten really good at it, and you can be really efficient with it, so that you can increase your profit. Because typically what's happening is that when you contract a project, it takes you more time to do it because of this thing called optimism bias. We always think we can do more than we can. We always think things are going to turn out better than they end up turning out. So that always means your profit is constantly eroding. That means that, if you contract something, you used your building blocks of the billable hour, and something takes you 10% more time internally than you contracted for, you just chewed away 10%, a huge chunk of your margin. So you have to find very specific opportunities with your clients and it sounds like you're going to charge more than it's going to take. It's like, yeah, you do. And you have to understand the concept that, wow, the client will pay us that $20,000 for, what's actually going to end up being $5,000 of cost for us. We're going to make a huge margin on it because they're totally cool with it, because they value that expertise of ours, and they're happy signing that contract for $20,000 that we can deliver for low bucks. Most firms will say, okay, we'll just apply our regular formula to this. We're going to contract, for $8,000 for our $5,000 worth of labor and cost, and we'll make our regular margin. You can't do this every single contract, but you have to find specific opportunities where you are able to provide a really high value service for a low dollar of cost that you can start to stretch your margin a little bit. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. No, I want to stick with that for a minute because I'm really curious on that. So it seems like, how can we be more efficient, is one option, but probably not efficient enough to ever make 3 times the profit per se. But then I've heard a lot of like, well, if we ask for too much, right, instead of the $8,000, we only need 5,000,
right,
we're going to make our profit. If we ask for 20, that's being greedy. So how do you get that mindset? Because I think of it as like, what is the market willing to pay you is what you should get paid, and is what you deserve to get paid, and you're not taking advantage of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's, again, this is another area we could spend an entire hour talking about something else, but there's 3 ways that you can price anything, right? One is cost plus, which means you take your cost, you mark it up a little bit, and you sell it. One is market-based pricing, which means that you look at the marketplace, you understand what the marketplace is paying, you understand where you want to sit in that marketplace. Do you want to be a low-cost provider or a high-cost provider, or where do you want to sit? And you price things relative to what the market is charging for it. And the third thing is value pricing. And value pricing means that, what is the ultimate value that this customer, this client is going to get out of our work? And what is our fair share of that? And it has nothing to do with the marketplace. It has nothing to do with your costs. It has everything to do with what value do they place on it? What are they willing to pay? And what's your fair share? That's what that whole concept is about. And when firms are starting to think through how to price things differently, you start to understand that you have to price clients differently, and you have to price them relative to the ultimate value that they place on something. you can't charge someone too much for something that they're never going to pay or they don't value. But if you're able to, through your good discovery and your good questioning process, you're able to really understand what's important to them. Is speed important to you? Is safety important to you? Is, cost really important to you? If you're able to arrange the approach to your work and your pricing in a way that appeals to the things that are most valuable to them, the things that they assign most work for, then that takes that downward pressure off of price, right? If you're trying to do stuff that they won't pay for, they're like, nope, push the price down, right? So what we want to do is we want to take that constant downward pressure off of price by understanding what's important to people and pricing it.
Yeah, solving the problem.
Yeah.
I often find that, and I'm really curious on what your thoughts are on this, is that as a consultant to an architect who is getting paid from an owner, it seems like they're our bottleneck to getting the more opportunity, the more fee. If they're not good at sales, we're not going to get the larger fees that maybe we're trying to get. So do you have any ideas, or, can we teach our clients how to sell work for themselves?
Yeah, one of the important things I do with all the firms I work with is that I show them how to start using 3-option pricing proposals. And what 3-option pricing proposals are is, it presents to your, if you're a sub-consultant to your prime consultant, if you're working directly with, the client, it just gives them 3 options in the work to be done at different pricing levels. So it lets them choose. And the elements that are involved in each of those different options, if you think of it as like a light, medium, and heavy, or however you
good, better, best.
Good, better, best scenario, sure. That technique does a couple different things, right? It gives your buyers, your clients, or even the prime consultants that you're working under, it gives them the needed context that they need in order to say, okay, so we've got a range here from this number to this number. So they've clearly explored different ideas, different options, and they're giving us a range. And it gives them just enough choice so they feel that they have some ownership and authorship in that whole process. It lets them choose. All too often, how we're coming up with pricing is we're sitting down with a spreadsheet in front of us, wrestling with hours here, hours there, cost here, cost there, whatever else. And we're coming up with one number at the bottom of the spreadsheet. And you're thinking, that's a pretty big number. We're going to have a tough time having them say yes to it. But then we're like, I don't know any way to do this. So you just wrap it up in your nice little PDF. You attach it to your email and you send it off and you cross your fingers and hope for the best, right? That never works. It never works, right? So what this whole approach to 3 options is, look, we've considered this. We know that there's 3 ways to do it. The lower cost is going to pull some things out, some of which you don't care about, some of which you might really, really care about. The middle option is hopefully going to include kind of a nice little Goldilocks sort of, there's just enough of the things that they need and want and all that in the middle. And then the third option is the one that says, look, if we really think about this and all the complexity, all the details and everything else that might be needed in order to get you across the finish line here, in order to really make this a wonderful project, this is what it could cost, right? So, and it lets them decide. Here's your 3 options. Just pick one. And a lot of times they start thinking, oh, can we do a little bit of that one, a little bit of this one? But it's great because it just facilitates a really nice conversation. It says, great, you guys look like you thought this through really well. You've given us some really great choices. We're going to go with the middle one. Because everybody picks the middle.
Yep.
It's a safe spot. I like the middle.
It's a safe spot. And I will tell you, most sort of contemporary like software as a service products, when you're going online to buy your different levels of, TurboTax, everybody's going to start doing their taxes, right? So, you always have the good, better, best versions of all those things. To think that that type of approach to pricing doesn't apply to very complex, very high dollar services is naive. It absolutely does, because that's the way that people are buying everything now. Business to business, business to consumer. That's it. Everybody is buying stuff that way. So I think professional services firms can align to that because it leverages all kinds of cognitive biases and all sorts of other stuff. So it's a great approach. And there's a specific way that it needs to be done in order to be effective.
If I remember correctly, earlier in this podcast, you brought this up of like, here's our fee. The client goes, no, we want it for less. And you go, okay, we'll do it for less.
Yeah.
How do you hold your value when they come back to you and say, you said 20,000, we need you at 15,000. And they're kind of looking for you to more or less hold the scope that you've already agreed upon. What do you say to that consultant?
Well, this is what we're in negotiation now, right? So now we're in negotiation. Hopefully we're having a conversation and it says, great, how should we get there? And you don't say anything else. Okay, great. All right. Okay, great. How would you like us to do that? And you're quiet, right? So that's one, that is literally a technique right there. You say, okay, how would you recommend we get there? So it gets them involved in, because immediately they're going to think, oh, they're going to have to take stuff out, right? They're going to have to take stuff out. Really, well, we can't just do that. How do you expect us to do that? But then there's other techniques that you can use in negotiation. All of those terms and conditions that you have in your contracts that you don't ever think are negotiable, they are all negotiable. Meaning that, great, we'll do it for 15. Pay us all upfront now, right? We'll sign the contract today. Pay us $15,000 right now. Good. And maybe they'll do that. They're like, oh, this is fantastic, right? And you think, well, we're still not making that extra $5,000, but maybe you can be a little bit more efficient with the work. Maybe you can make that work, but you're also not spending all that money on the back end, chasing them down after they're 60 days late, 90 days late, whatever else. I mean, you end up ringing you're going crazy. You're like, I can't believe these guys are 6 months late on a $20,000 invoice. This is insane, right? It's just like, it's crazy. I mean, you've spent $10,000 just in, trying to, taking your sort of accounting staff out for drinks, trying to get them to relax because there's nobody's paying on time, right? So you just eliminate that. That's out.
I like that. And it's very similar conceptually to the almost asking what price the client expects. It's, if you have to remove something, you kind of put that on them. Like, what can I pull from this?
Yep.
Because, something kind of has to go.
Yeah. And it's, we need to recognize the early sales process, these early sales conversations as powerful leading indicators on what it's going to be like to work with them, right? If you're at the 11th hour and they're like, you're going to give us 100% of the scope for 80% of the price, you say, go elsewhere, right? It's like, great. I know someone else who can do exactly that. And here's their number, right? So, because they're not going to suddenly become an absolutely fantastic client to be working with after you've signed this contract. They're going to be a pain in the neck, right? So you have to recognize these leading indicators, these early red flags that start cropping up, and before the ink gets onto the paper, you say, nope, next.
I like that. So from someone that's not really in the sales, we've talked about that. What does the sales and management position look like once you're sort of the 20-year engineer, third phase of your career? How much time are you spending in that BD sales kind of position? Yeah,
well, it's interesting. Some late career professionals I find want to pull themselves out of that. They want, like, I just want to do what I got into this for. I just want to do the design work and the engineering work. I just want to focus on that. So you have those. But you have others that are really interested in this, that really love this whole selling thing, and that's totally fine. And you have others, and maybe there's some overlap here, that really love to teach others. And that's obviously the folks that we really want the firms to be promoting, is the people who want to take that expertise and to then teach others inside their organization. So the folks who are willing to mentor and to guide, because sales is challenging, but those long-term professionals, hopefully they're willing to bring some of those younger and even mid-career professionals under their wings, and to show them how this whole thing works. That's important. That's super critical for that phase in their career.
So for a couple, probably a handful or two of 20-year engineers listening to this that still have maybe another 20 years ahead of them, where do you think sales is going? Do you think it's changing drastically? Like you brought up earlier, right? People are now looking for options and to be consulted almost in a sales directive. What do you think the future looks like?
Yeah, I hope that people are embracing more contemporary sales techniques, using 3-option proposals, rethinking how they're negotiating contracts, being more proactive, showing, younger professionals that, look, you cannot continue to rely on that wonderful RFP just dropping into your inbox that you're perfect for. You can't continue to wait for opportunities to come to you. You have to go and create them and make them, right? So that's I think really important for young and mid-career professionals to embrace, is that mindset of, if we want to be working on the ideal projects for us, we need to go find them. We need to create them. So that's really important. Yeah, and people embracing how contemporary buyers are buying, people who are understanding that behavioral economics and psychology have a huge impact on this buying selling thing, and sort of embracing that. I think that the contemporary, professional can really, in a professional services firm, can really start separating themselves from all the other folks who are doing it just the same old way, by using some of these new approaches, by using contemporary pricing, by understanding that selling and negotiation needs to be conversations, a series of interactions. Past few years have been really hard on sort of interpersonal relationships. So I think there's that much more emphasis for us to not be attaching the PDF proposal to the email and firing it off and hoping for the best, right? We need to engage, and we need to have some conversations that on occasion are going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But I think once you've had an uncomfortable conversation with someone and it works out okay, both parties come out the other side of that conversation better off, with greater respect, greater understanding, more empathy. So yeah, I think sometimes you got to kind of arm wrestle a little bit, particularly in sales, to get through it and to come out the other side better off.
So I think Max and I have had a little bit of a challenge asking questions for a 20-year engineer, as neither of us are close to that. What other things do you find yourself consulting on when you're going into a firm with, the leadership team per se, that is that kind of 20-year seniority level? What other things are you teaching them? Are they learning from? Are you seeing are common mistakes that are occurring within the industry?
Right. I think there's, just a lot of the things we've touched on is believing that all the stuff that served them well last year is going to serve them, well now, right? Not being willing to experiment with new ideas and new ways of approaching things, and then continuing to model those same long-term behaviors to the rest of their firm, right? I think that's when the senior longtime team members start to model new behaviors, start to reframe and rethink and bring new mindsets to things, that's when the mid-career and young professionals really start to embrace it, because they start to be able to see the success. Because those younger folks aren't necessarily practicing this stuff all the time, so they need to see others in the firm practicing it and really getting good results. And all of a sudden, somebody comes back, a long-term senior leader that put together a really well-sorted 3-option proposal, and the client said yes to the high option, and they had a really great conversation, and both parties are really excited. They come back and show those younger professionals, that it was this huge win, and they did a fantastic job with it, and it really, really worked. Boom. I mean, that the light bulb goes off in everyone's head and says, oh my gosh, this is actually going to really work. And I've seen that again and again, and it's been so exciting to watch the young folks think, oh yeah, that's, usually the younger professionals are like, of course that was going to work. That's how everybody buys everything now. But it's so great to see, because all of a sudden that big light bulb goes off, and the learning just accelerates really, really fast. So love to see that.
So with that, what else have we not discussed or talked about within this? What other things do you think we need to discuss, or do you like to share with our audience that you think could be valuable?
The concept that I said initially about, individuals need to be really curious, that is super important throughout, anyone's career, in their, the decades that they are involved in a firm, moving from a junior team member to, a longtime senior leader. Maintaining that sense of curiosity will arm them well for, being that young career curious individual, to that mid-career being able to practice and screw up sometimes, but really be able to generate proposals that the clients really love. And then the longtime professionals, being able to really being curious and being able to dig deep, because a lot of times the senior leaders have developed good long-term relationships and they have the ability to dig a little bit deeper into their clients, their needs, their goals, their desires, all that sort of stuff. Leveraging that curiosity to really get to the heart of what your clients really need, and then, giving them sort of responsive proposals is super powerful. So, if anything, I would want people at any point in their career just to reawaken and rediscover that youthful sense of curiosity that manages to fade with time.
I think that's a great place to end the podcast. Mark, thank you so much for all your time today. And I think it's really valuable. And I know for myself, I've learned a lot.
I have learned so much from this.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mac, Zach. It's been a pleasure talking about that scary world of sales with both of you.
Thank you for introducing us to it.
You bet. Thanks, guys.
Cool.